The air inside the Boeing 737 was charged with tension as 73 pairs of eyes were glued to the scuffle taking place in row 17. Gerald Hopkins, his face contorted with anger, was pointing a rough finger at Caleb Johnson's chest, as if it were a weapon. "I said, 'Get that stuff off my chair, kid,'" Gerald growled, the last word ringing out like a grenade with the pin pulled. Caleb, whose civilian clothes hid his toned body and 20 years of naval special operations experience, looked up. Those eyes had seen battlefields on 4 continents, yet they still held a surprising calm. "Sir," Caleb replied calmly, "I think you're mistaken. This bag isn't—" The kick came unexpectedly. Gerald's Italian leather shoe slammed into Caleb's shin. In the silence that followed, a collective gasp echoed throughout the cabin. No one on Flight 2783 to Denver could have imagined that the next 60 minutes would change everything, forcing them to confront truths they had been avoiding for decades. 3 hours earlier, Caleb Johnson had arrived at Liberty International Airport with plenty of time to spare. At 53, the retired Navy SEAL still moved with a quick, sure gait, a habit honed over 26 years in the military. Today, his mission was simply to go to Denver to attend his beloved daughter's white coat ceremony. "Black coffee," Caleb said to the barista at the station cafe, handing over his credit card and adding, "and a blueberry pie." "Where are you going?" asked the young girl as she prepared the order, her name tag reading Maggie. "Coming to Denver, my daughter is about to start medical school," Caleb replied, pride evident on his face. "Wow, that's amazing. You must be so proud." Maggie laughed. Caleb nodded, a small smile on his lips. "The happiest day of my life. Well, second only to the day he was born, probably." He brought coffee and pastries to a small table overlooking the runway, watching the planes taxi and take off with mechanical precision. His thoughts drifted to his daughter Sophia, a naturally intelligent girl who had vowed to become a surgeon after watching military doctors save her father's life on the battlefield. The long scar that runs down Caleb's left side is a vivid reminder of an incident 12 years ago in Mosul. His team was evacuating a senior intelligence officer when their convoy hit a mine. The explosion tore apart the lead vehicle, and shrapnel lodged in his leg and hip. The next 18 hours were a battle with death. First aid at the scene, emergency transport, and then lengthy surgery at a military hospital. When Caleb was out of danger, Sophia, then 14, was allowed to visit. But instead of being frightened by the sight of the IVs, machines, and her father's injuries, she was fascinated. Sophia kept asking the doctor about the treatment process, surgical techniques, and recovery methods. Brooks Rehabilitation Center. Sophia checked out 3 medical books from the library to read. Caleb's phone vibrated. A text message from Sophia appeared. "Dad, you have to get on the plane. Mom is worried sick. You know her." Caleb smiled and typed back, "At the airport, Princess. Everything is on schedule. Remind me to breathe. Love you. Love you, Dad." 3. The nickname Princess has followed Sophia since she was 5 years old, and even though she is now a young woman, the name still holds a special emotional story between father and daughter. A tough father of the Navy SEALs and a strong daughter, never a fragile princess. On the other side of the airport, Gerald Hopkins was having a completely different morning. The 62-year-old property developer checked his Omega watch 3 times in just 5 minutes, frustrated by the snail-like pace of the security line. "Excuse me, what's taking so long?" Gerald snapped at a TSA security officer. "I have a flight to catch," the staff replied with a professional, expressionless gaze. "We are working at full speed, sir. Next time, please come earlier." Gerald gritted his teeth. He hadn't meant to arrive so close to the time, but a marathon call with investors for the Aurora Center project in downtown Newark had delayed his plans. Raising $20 million couldn't be rushed, and sometimes sacrifices like this were necessary. When it was his turn, Gerald took off his loafers and placed his laptop in a separate tray, as is the habit of a frequent flyer. "Sir, please step over here for additional inspection," another employee called. "Unbelievable!" "For what?" Gerald snapped. "Random pick, sir. It'll be quick." Gerald glanced at his watch, a knot of anxiety tightening in his chest. This was why he usually preferred to fly private, but this impromptu trip to Denver didn't leave him enough time to make arrangements. After passing through the metal detector, Gerald Hopkins, with the practiced movements of a man constantly on the move, was about to pick up his belongings when another security guard asked, "Sir, please step forward for additional inspection." Gerald frowned, irritated. "Ridiculous! For what reason?" "It's just a random check, sir. It'll be quick," the clerk explained. He glanced at his watch again, the knot of anxiety in his chest tightening. This was why Gerald always preferred to fly private, but today's urgent trip to Denver did not allow him to make the usual arrangements. The emergency? Another mess caused by son Logan Hopkins, as usual, involving money and bad decisions. Logan, 28, never seemed to grasp the concept of responsibility. By Logan's age, Gerald was managing major projects for his father's construction company, proving himself fit to take over the family business. He worked 6 days a week while his friends were still trying to figure out their path. By his 30s, Gerald was married to Victoria, had a child, and was well on his way to becoming the next head of Hopkins Properties. And Logan? Prep school, then Belmont Business School. Opportunities Gerald had worked hard to earn for his son. And what did Logan do? Drop out of his MBA program to mix cocktails at a hipster bar. That was unacceptable to Gerald. As Gerald passed through security, the terminal's loudspeakers blared the boarding announcement. He hurried toward the gate, dragging his suitcase, his frustration mounting. The morning's troubles, Logan's troubles, the delayed investor call, and now the airport chaos, were wearing thin on his patience. On Flight 2783, veteran flight attendant Marilyn Carter greeted passengers with the warmth honed over 32 years in the sky. At 58, Marilyn has seen all sorts of situations in the air, from medical emergencies to disruptive passengers to marriage proposals in first class. She still remembers the golden age of aviation, when people dressed up to fly and cocktails were served in real glasses. "Welcome," Marilyn said to a young family struggling to find seats. "The baby seats are in the overhead compartment. If you need to change a diaper, there's a changing table in the back bathroom." As Caleb Johnson walked up, Marilyn noticed the politeness in his nod and the neatness and precision with which he packed his carry-on luggage. With her experience, Marilyn can easily recognize a soldier, even a discharged one, just by his appearance and behavior. "You have a window seat, right?" she confirmed after looking at the ticket. "Lucky today, the middle seat is empty." "Good news," Caleb replied, smiling sincerely. "Are you going to Denver for business or to visit family?" "Family," Caleb replied. "My daughter received her white coat ceremony at Brookdale Medical School." Marilyn's face was radiant. "A future doctor? That's great. My son is a pharmacist, and I'm so proud." "People in the medical field deserve to be honored," Caleb agreed. "She worked hard to get where she is today." As they chatted, the line of people continued to board the plane, looking for seats, preparing for the 2-hour flight. The plane was fairly empty today, only about 3/4 full, a rarity in these days when airlines cram passengers like sardines. Marilyn lowered her voice and said discreetly, "I saved some extra snacks for you. Consider it a small gift to celebrate the pride of the family." Remember to pass on my best wishes to the little girl." "Thank you so much," Caleb replied emotionally. He took a seat by the window, carefully arranging his luggage. Caleb tucked a tattered copy of The Old Man and the Sea into the front seat pocket, a work he had read over and over again over the years, each time finding new lessons about perseverance and dignity in adversity. As he was about to put his phone on airplane mode, Caleb received another text from Sophia. Mom asked Dad if he should bring the navy suit or the gray suit. It was a matter of life and death. Caleb laughed and texted back, "Both. Dad knows the Johnsons never have just one choice." Victoria is still known for her attention to detail. Their marriage ended 15 years ago, but they maintain a respectful friendship for the sake of Sophia's safety and well-being. It wasn't always easy, especially when Caleb was constantly on assignment away from home during the divorce. But they got through it through compromise and a commitment to keeping their daughter's best interests at heart. The last passengers were rushing to board the plane. Caleb saw Gerald Hopkins before Gerald noticed him. Same expensive suit, same impatient look, same way Gerald snapped at Marilyn when being shown a chair. "Sir, seat 17C, aisle, right this way," Marilyn said, still smiling professionally, though it was easy to see Gerald's frown. Gerald moved down the aisle, his eyes scanning the seat numbers until they stopped at row 17, where a small neck pillow sat on the empty middle seat between him and Caleb. A small neck pillow sat on the middle seat. "Is this yours?" Gerald Hopkins asked, gesturing toward the pillow. "Yes, sir," Caleb Johnson replied. "I was just about to put it away. The middle seat is empty." Gerald nodded slightly, sat down in his seat without saying another word, immediately took out his phone and made a call while the plane door was still open. "Logan, it's Dad. I'm on the plane. We'll talk about this after we meet. This isn't something that can be resolved over the phone. I don't care what your roommate thinks. This is a family matter. Meet me at the Crestmont at 4. Don't be late." Caleb sat staring out the window, pretending not to notice, watching the ground crew complete their final preparations. Yet he could easily sense the tension in the exchange. The tone was gruff, sharp, and full of hints of a father-son relationship fraying. The scene brought back memories of Caleb's father, a tough, regimented man with strict expectations, things that both pressured and motivated Caleb to excel. Fortunately, Caleb's choice of military service was accepted by his family, as the Marine tradition had been in the Johnson family's blood since the Korean War. As the flight attendants completed the safety check, a young woman rushed onto the plane, apparently the last passenger. Honey blonde hair tied in a bun, oversized headphones in her ears, a bulging backpack on her back, and a crumpled plane ticket in her hand. 17B, she gasped to Marilyn Carter. Marilyn frowned. Strange, the system said that seat was available. "I just got upgraded at the counter, close to my flight time," the girl explained, weaving her way through the crowd to row 17. When she arrived, she smiled brightly at both Caleb and Gerald. "Looks like I'm sitting between you two." "Lucky me." Caleb politely lifted the neck pillow and smiled back. Gerald just shifted slightly, his eyes still glued to the phone screen. "I'm Holly Bennett," the girl introduced, shaking hands with Caleb and Gerald in turn. "Caleb Johnson," Caleb replied, squeezing her hand. Gerald just touched his hand and replied curtly, "Gerald Hopkins." "Nice to meet you two," Holly said, adjusting her backpack and sitting down in the middle seat. "Looks like you had a hard time catching your flight," Caleb commented. "My flight from Providence was delayed. I had to run all the way from Terminal D." Holly's open, natural voice shows she is used to striking up conversations with strangers. "It's okay," Caleb replied, "as long as we're in time." Gerald just snorted coldly, then buried his head in his phone again until the flight attendant asked all passengers to switch to airplane mode. The Boeing began to taxi onto the runway, and the three people in row 17 took their seats. Caleb looked out the window, Holly rearranged her belongings, and Gerald focused on the documents in his briefcase. None of them knew that the next few hours would change their lives in unexpected ways. The plane took off smoothly, then banked northwest toward Denver. On the ground, Hartford shrank, and the Ashland River shimmered like a silver ribbon in the sunlight. Caleb let his mind wander, finding peace in the familiar rhythm of each flight. Beside him, Holly pulled out an old manuscript, filled with handwritten notes and colored markers. Seeing Caleb's curious gaze, she smiled. "I'm doing a master's degree in sociology. This is my thesis." "What topic?" Caleb asked, his eyes flashing with genuine interest. "The perception of American identity after 9/11, Holly explains. Specifically, how the concepts of heroism and service have changed." She hesitated a bit, then added honestly, "Actually, I'm interviewing veterans as part of my research." "Really?" Caleb nodded, his interest growing. "Yes," Holly nodded. "Their perspective is invaluable. The way war affects world views, especially after multiple campaigns, is worth studying." She hesitantly observed him, then boldly asked, "You served, right?" Caleb raised his eyebrows slightly. "How did you guess?" "The way you sit, the way you look around," Holly replied. "My dad served 2 tours in Iraq. I learned to recognize that." Caleb chuckled, impressed by her insight. "Yes, I was in the Navy, 26 years. "That's amazing," Holly muttered. "It is my honor," Caleb replied simply. "Is your father still alive?" he asked. A shadow passed over Holly's eyes. "He died in Fallujah in 2004. I was 7 years old then." "I'm sorry for your loss," Caleb Johnson said softly, his voice quiet. "Too many good people have not returned." Holly Bennett nodded, blinking rapidly to contain her emotions. "That was part of the reason I pursued this topic," she admits. "I wanted to understand more about what my dad went through." "Did the research help you?" Caleb asked, his voice sincere. Holly thought before answering. "Yes and no. I learned the larger context, the geopolitical forces, the military structure, the psychological impact of deployments. But the personal, intimate experiences remained elusive. My father rarely shared them, even before his last deployment." "That's common," Caleb nodded. "Memories like that are hard to put into words. Sometimes silence is a way to protect loved ones." "And you?" Holly asked gently. "Have you ever told your daughter about your time in the war?" "A few things," Caleb replied. "Funny things, friendships, the sense of duty, but none of the heavy stuff." He paused for a moment, memories flooding back. "Until I got hurt. Then everything changed." "Changed how?" Holly asked softly. "When you're close to death," Caleb said slowly, "you look back at your priorities. I realized hiding reality isn't always a protection. It might confuse her if I'm not around one day." Their conversation paused as flight attendant Marilyn Carter pushed a cart to row 17, just as Gerald Hopkins returned from the restroom. "Excuse me?" Gerald said, causing Holly to stand up to make way. As she stood up, the manuscript on her lap slid down, pages flying across the cabin floor. "Oh, no!" Holly cried, quickly kneeling down to pick it up. Both Caleb and Gerald immediately bent down to help her. Gerald accidentally picked up a highlighted page and glanced at it. "The American hero model has shifted from reluctant warrior to professional warrior," he read aloud. "Interesting perspective," Gerald commented as he handed it back to Holly. "Thank you," Holly smiled, sorting through the messy pages. "This subject is More complicated than one might think. Gerald sat back in his chair, a thoughtful look in his eyes. My father was also a soldier in Vietnam, he suddenly shared. In the 30 years I knew him, I never heard him say that once. This sincerity surprised both Holly and Caleb. That was common with that generation, Caleb said softly. Different times, different wars, different ways society accepted them. Gerald nodded, a flash of sadness crossing his eyes. A completely different world. Marilyn returned with the ordered drinks. Black coffee, she handed it to Caleb. No sugar, Coke for me, Holly said, taking the can from Marilyn. Here, mineral water with lemon for you. Marilyn handed Gerald the glass. The three of them sipped their drinks, the atmosphere becoming more comfortable between them. The conversation might have ended there, if not for Holly's curious nature mixed with her research goals. Mr. Hopkins, Holly asked softly, what did your father do after the war? Gerald hesitated for a moment at the unexpected personal question, but after a moment he replied, first worked as a construction worker, later opened his own company. Gradually turned it into one of the largest residential construction companies in Hartford in the 80s. There was a hint of undisguised pride in his voice. And you succeeded him? Caleb asked further. I took over in 1999, Gerald said, his voice heavy, then expanded into commercial real estate. He spoke of Hopkins' developments with a mixture of pride and pressure. You've certainly made some big changes, Caleb commented softly. Yes, Gerald admitted, then added abruptly, my father built modest homes for his workers, and I... He paused. I moved into luxury apartments, office buildings, and shopping malls. Sometimes I wonder if he would approve if he were still alive. That vulnerability is a stark contrast to the cold image Gerald initially presents. It creates a space for real connection. When did your father die? Caleb asked softly. He had a heart attack at 64, Gerald replied, his hand unconsciously going to his left breast. Just like my grandfather. It seems the Hopkins men don't have the heart-healthy genes. It must be hard, Caleb sympathized, losing someone you wanted to see what you built. Gerald just nodded, clearly not wanting to sink deeper into his emotions. But life goes on, he finished in a matter-of-fact tone. Just then, the plane banked slightly in a wave of turbulence. The seatbelt light chime sounded, Marilyn's reassuring voice coming over the loudspeaker. Holly turned pale, her hands clenched on the sides of the chair. I don't take these bumps well, she confessed, smiling wryly. It's just airflow, Caleb explained calmly, like driving over a pothole. Intellectually I understand, Holly sighed, but my stomach doesn't. Gerald rummaged through his coat pocket and took out a small bottle of pills. Try this. I always carry it with me when I fly. Surprised by the kindness, Holly accepted. Thank you, she said sincerely. I've presented to a room full of billionaires, Gerald chuckled, and I still get a stomachache from nervousness. This simple confession warmed the atmosphere around row 17. The unexpected confession from a man who always exuded cool confidence changed the atmosphere in row 17. The turbulence passed, but something shifted. A fragile yet genuine connection was formed between three disparate people who had met by chance at 30,000 feet. As the flight passed by more than half an hour, Holly Bennett began to talk more with both men, her investigative instincts prompting her to skillfully mine stories they probably would never have told a stranger. "You're in Chicago for your daughter's white gown?" Holly asked Caleb Johnson, her eyes shining with curiosity. "You must be so proud." "Very proud," Caleb smiled, his face softening. "Sophia has wanted to be a doctor since she was 10. After I was injured in Helmand, she would come to the military hospital to visit me, pestering the doctors with all sorts of questions. How does this medicine work? Why is it bandaged like that? Finally, they gave her some medical journals to read so she wouldn't have to ask. "She's special," Holly commented. "That's right." Caleb proudly took out his phone, showing her a photo of a young girl with determined eyes, just like her father's, a warm and radiant smile in front of the gate of Brookdale Medical School. "Full scholarship, graduated valedictorian from UVA," Caleb added. Gerald Hopkins glanced at the photograph, his eyes flashing with something indescribable. "My son is in Chicago, too," he said suddenly. "But the circumstances are a little different." His voice was heavy, with something hidden that made Holly want to ask more, but just then the plane shook violently. Overhead, luggage racks flew open, and items tumbled into the aisle. Several oxygen masks fell from the ceiling, dangling like strange fruits. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated and fasten your seat belts," the captain's voice said, calm but urgent. "We are experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Crew, please secure the cabin." The plane shuddered violently, causing many passengers to scream. Holly clenched her hands on the arms of her seat and closed her eyes. Caleb remained calm, his face betraying no panic, only the familiar concentration of someone who had faced danger before. Meanwhile, Gerald turned pale, his hand clutching his chest. "Are you okay?" Caleb leaned in and asked softly, noticing the uneasiness. "I'm fine," Gerald nodded stiffly, his breathing becoming heavy. "Just surprised." The plane continued to rock violently for several more minutes, like a roller coaster. Marilyn Carter and other flight attendants struggled to move around the cabin, checking on passengers and cleaning up spilled items. When she reached row 17, Marilyn immediately noticed the unusual expression on Gerald's face. "Sir, do you have any chest pain?" she asked in a professional voice. "No." "Just indigestion," Gerald quickly dismissed. Marilyn wasn't entirely convinced. "I'll bring you some water. If it gets worse, please let me know." When she left, Caleb leaned over and whispered, "Chest pain on a plane shouldn't be taken lightly. I've seen many comrades' lives saved because they weren't careless." "I didn't have a heart attack," Gerald almost snapped, his face slowly regaining some color. "I'm perfectly healthy. My cardiologist just confirmed it last month." "I believe you," Caleb replied evenly. "But pressure sometimes spares no one, no matter how healthy." Gerald's face stiffened. "I don't need a stranger to teach me how to manage stress." The atmosphere suddenly became heavy. Holly shifted slightly, trying to ease the situation. "I think we're almost out of the turbulence zone." As if in response, the captain's voice rang out. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have found a more stable atmosphere. The rest of the time to Chicago should be smoother. Sorry for the inconvenience." Sighs of relief and forced laughter filled the cabin. Passengers began to straighten their luggage and clean up spilled coffee. Another attendant helped an elderly woman clean up a mess, and Marilyn returned with a glass of water for Gerald. He took it with a curt nod. "We'll be back to serving drinks soon," Marilyn said to the 3 people in row 17. "Do you need anything else?" After taking the order, she left. An awkward silence fell over them. The friendliness that had been present was gone, replaced by a stifling atmosphere after Gerald's cold rejection. Sensing a valuable opportunity for her research on American perception and conflict, Holly tried again. "Mr. Hopkins, you mentioned your son in Chicago. What does he do?" Gerald took a sip of water, regaining his composure before replying. "Logan is taking a break from work," he said, choosing his words. "He studied business in Pennsylvania, but hasn't found a clear path yet. That's pretty common these days, Holly Bennett said, her voice soft. My generation faces very different challenges than yours. Gerald Hopkins's face tightened slightly. Some challenges are constant, he said, like the importance of hard work and personal responsibility. That's true, Holly nodded. But the concept of success has changed. Many of us young people prioritize fulfillment and social impact over traditional metrics like money or status. A convenient excuse for lack of effort, Gerald commented, though his tone was less harsh than before. Caleb Johnson, who had been looking out the window, turned back to join the conversation. Every generation has its own mountain to climb, he said. The terrain changes, but the road remains the same. Poetic, Gerald replied, half sarcastically, half concedingly. But hardship is no excuse for bad decisions. Exactly, Caleb nodded. But sometimes, what looks like a mistake from the outside is the best choice in that person's circumstances. Gerald's eyes sharpened. You mean my son's situation isn't his fault? I don't dare judge, Caleb said calmly. I'm just generalizing. So let me be specific, Gerald said, his voice laced with irritation. Logan had it all. Private school, financial backing, connections. He was studying for his MBA at Wharton and suddenly announced that he wanted to pursue his passion, cocktail making. How is that not a bad choice? Caleb considered for a moment before answering. I don't know Logan or his motivations, but I do know that the meaning of the job is important. In the SEALs, we always believe the mission leads the way. Without a clear purpose, even the best soldier will lose his way. And you think bartending serves a purpose? Gerald asked, his voice laced with both disbelief and disappointment. Only Logan can answer that, Caleb said. But I've seen incredibly talented officers leave the military to teach in rough neighborhoods or build clean water systems in developing countries. From the outside, those moves may seem like steps back. But inside, they're driven by an idealism that's hard for outsiders to understand. The somewhat tense exchange was interrupted when Marilyn Carter returned with fresh trays of drinks. Just then, the plane shook slightly, forcing her to hold on to the back of her seat. Sorry, sir, she smiled, professionally. The captain said we were almost out of the turbulence. As Marilyn left, Gerald pulled out his phone, pretending to be busy with emails, clearly wanting to avoid further conversation. Holly glanced at Caleb, smiled apologetically, and then turned back to her unfinished manuscript. For the next 20 minutes, silence reigned over row 17. Outside the window, the landscape had transformed into vast fields of green and yellow, crossed by straight roads leading to small towns. A picturesque picture of an American autumn. Caleb watched Gerald Hopkins quietly from the corner of his eye. A successful businessman with a fragile heart, a strict father trying to mold his son into a model. The initial pride he sensed in him now seemed to be covered with invisible scars of expectation and disappointment. Caleb's thoughts drifted back to Sophia. He had never pushed his daughter into a military career, though he had hoped she would consider the Naval Academy or at least ROTC. When Sophia had insisted on medicine, he had supported her wholeheartedly, though it had taken time to fully let go of her old expectations. Perhaps Gerald was also struggling in that process, not yet learning to see the value of another path. Caleb's train of thought was interrupted when Holly exclaimed, "Dead!" "What's wrong?" Caleb asked, worried. "I was supposed to present my research paper at the conference tomorrow," Holly explained, frantically scrolling through her phone. "But my professor just said, they moved my talk up to tonight, 7, not tomorrow morning." She paled and checked the time. "I haven't finished my presentation yet. I still have to edit all the slides and my notes are all messed up." "There's still about 3 hours left," Caleb calculated quickly. "The plane lands at 3:15. If I hurry. But the conference is at Brookdale University, all the way in downtown Chicago, Holly mused. There's no way I'll be able to prepare. Gerald, though he had seemed detached, was listening. He looked up and said, "About a 25-minute drive from O'Hare Airport, if you take a quick taxi. Don't take the train." Both Holly and Caleb were surprised. "I have real estate projects all over Chicago," Gerald explained in an almost apologetic tone. "I know the city's traffic by heart." "Thank you very much," Holly said, grateful. "It's just, I'm still nervous. A bad presentation could ruin my entire academic career." "Can I see your manuscript?" Caleb offered, holding out his hand. Caleb chuckled, taking the file from Holly Bennett. "Sometimes a fresh perspective helps more than you think," he said, as if he were in the middle of a battle plan review. Holly hesitated for a moment, then handed him the notes. "I really need some feedback right now." Caleb read intently, his eyes sharp with the knowledge of a former officer accustomed to handling intelligence reports and marching orders. "Your thesis about the changing American hero model after the war is compelling," he commented after a few minutes, "but the part about the civil-military rift here needs to be reinforced with more concrete examples." "I know," Holly admitted, sighing softly. "I had the data ready, just hadn't added it to the draft yet." As Caleb was carefully making his suggestions, Gerald Hopkins' phone suddenly buzzed with a text message. He glanced at the screen, his face immediately darkening. "What's wrong?" Caleb asked, noticing the change. Gerald breathed heavily. "My son, Logan, just canceled," he said, his voice full of disappointment. He said something came up. The way Gerald emphasized the last two words made the listener feel the bitterness in him. "I'm sorry," Caleb said sincerely. "It's a familiar story," Gerald replied dryly. "Commitments mean nothing to him. Responsibility is optional." He shook his head pensively. 2 years at a top business school, now mixing cocktails in some rundown bar in the middle of Wexford Park. "Wexford Park?" Holly perked up, looking excited. "It's quite a buzzing area now. Lots of creative shops and startups." Gerald smirked. That's exactly what Logan used as an excuse. Handmade products, sustainable models, all euphemisms to cover up. Pouring wine for idle children. "Bartending can be lucrative," Holly suggested lightly. "Plus, the people skills it develops are invaluable." "He deserves better than that," Gerald growled. "He was raised to be my successor, someone who builds something lasting like my father, like me." He clutched the phone, the screen long gone. Not to be a vagabond, aimless, without ambition. There was a mixture of anger and worry in Gerald's tone. Caleb recognized the complexity. A parent's love for a child is sometimes most heartbreaking when the child takes a path that is not what they expected. "Children will find their own path," Caleb said softly. "My daughter chose medicine because she saw the trauma of war firsthand. If I hadn't been injured, who knows what she would have chosen? We can only guide them, but we can't decide for them." Gerald's face turned cold. "It sounds nice, but it's also a delicious excuse for mediocrity. Or," Caleb kept his voice calm but authoritative, "it's because we realize the standards of success aren't always the same." The air in row 17 was thick. Holly shifted slightly back in her seat, clearly feeling the tension. She tried to break the heavy mood with a cheerful tone. "Actually, this topic is directly related to my research, the generational shift in the concept of achievement and personal identity, from valuing traditional institutions to searching for more personal meaning." "There is nothing personal about wasted talent," Gerald growled. "Some standards are immutable." "How?" Caleb asked, genuinely curious. Gerald was pensive, his eyes lost in space. "Build something of lasting value. contribute to society, create, not just consume. And don't you think that can be done outside of traditional business models? Caleb suggested. I'm not against entrepreneurship, Gerald corrected. I respect people who are truly creative. But making cocktails for tourists is a far cry from creating a new product or breaking into a market. But, Holly says cautiously, many young people do find deep value in such work. My research shows that the meaning of work today is no longer entirely material. Gerald frowned, clearly still skeptical. But before he could react, the captain's voice came over the loudspeaker. Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to land at O'Hare International Airport, Chicago. Please fasten your seatbelts and make sure your seats are in the upright position. Marilyn Carter quickly walked through the cabin, checking the seats and the dining table. When she reached row 17, she noticed a tense atmosphere. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice professional but concerned. "Fine, thank you," Caleb replied, smiling politely. "We were just talking a little about the modern American dream," Holly added, trying to inject some humor. Marilyn laughed, then continued her work, leaving the three passengers lost in their own thoughts as the city of Chicago slowly appeared below. Holly laughed, gently dispelling the tension. "Ah, those light-hearted sky conversations," she said. "Politics, religion, and generational values. The legendary trio that makes plane rides. Interesting." Her witty remark made both Caleb and Gerald chuckle, lightening the mood a bit. "I've been flying for so many years that I'm used to it," Marilyn Carter added as she passed by. "I don't know why, but in the clouds, people tend to speak their minds more easily than usual." As Marilyn left, Gerald turned slightly toward Caleb, a gesture that seemed to be an attempt to open up. "You said your daughter goes to Brookdale Medical, right? Has she always dreamed of being a doctor? A small but very noticeable olive branch." "Not really," Caleb replied, smiling at the memory. "When he was little, he wanted to be a marine biologist, then a pilot, and even considered joining the Navy like me." He smiled warmly. But after the accident, spending time in the military hospital changed everything. "Is it combat-related?" Gerald asked, surprising both Holly and Caleb a little at the direct concern. Caleb nodded. "Afghanistan. Our convoy hit a roadside mine near Kandahar. I took shrapnel on my left side." "My condolences," Gerald said, this time sincerely. "My father was in Vietnam. He never talked about the war, but all his life his right shoulder hurt when it rained." This spontaneous sharing signals a change in Gerald, from closed-minded to open-minded. "So, you always support whatever your daughter chooses?" Gerald continued to ask. "I support him finding a purpose in life," Caleb corrected. "As opposed to being a loafer, I push him to work hard, but never impose a career." Gerald seemed to think about that answer. "Logan has always been anti-conformist," he muttered. "When he was little, his mother called it freedom of spirit. I called it lack of discipline." "Perhaps," Caleb suggested gently, "both views are partly correct." Gerald was silent, then suddenly revealed, "Elizabeth, my ex-wife, is a cardiothoracic surgeon. We met when my company built a new wing for the hospital where she practiced. I thought the values of discipline and dedication would naturally pass on to our children. But medicine and business require different types of disciplines," Caleb notes. "My ex-wife was an intelligence analyst before moving into healthcare management. The way she approaches problems is completely different from mine, but no less effective." The plane banked slightly, beginning its descent to O'Hare. Below, the Chicago skyline, its towering buildings poking into the clouds, loomed along the shore of Lake Michigan. "I should get my stuff together," Holly said, gathering up her papers. "And really, thank you both." This conversation has given me valuable insight into my research. Glad to help, Caleb replied. Gerald nodded, then, after a moment's hesitation, he added, "When your article is published, remember to let me read it." Holly brightened at the unexpected concern. "I'll send you the official copy. Do you want me to give you a card?" She fumbled for her business card in her pocket as the flight attendants began reminding passengers to check their seatbelts. The plane descended through the clouds, the city below becoming clearer by the minute. Caleb tucked the book into the seat pocket and pulled his seatbelt tighter, his mind already turning to his upcoming reunion with Sophia. He had arranged for a taxi to take him straight to Brookdale University, where Sophia and Jessica were waiting. Even though they've been divorced for 15 years, Caleb and Jessica have remained friends for the sake of their daughter. It's not easy, but they've always put Sophia first. The plane shook slightly, a final wave of turbulence causing the luggage under the seats to shift. Gerald's briefcase slid out of place, into the space between his and Holly's seats. "Sorry," Gerald said, bending down to pick it up. As he did so, his elbow accidentally knocked Holly's water bottle over, spilling water all over her manuscript. "Oh, my God!" Holly cried, hastily lifting up the wet papers. "I'm really sorry." Gerald hurriedly pulled out a handkerchief and handed it to her. Caleb immediately pressed the call button for the flight attendant. "Oh, no," Holly said, her voice shaking, trying to soak up the moisture. "My presentation material tonight." Marilyn arrived quickly. "What's up?" "Water spilled on important documents," Caleb explained. "Do you have any tissues?" "I'll be right back," Marilyn replied, running off. Gerald continued to apologize, his expression extremely remorseful. "I'm really sorry. Is there any way I can help?" "It's not your fault." Holly forced a smile, trying to separate the soggy pages. Marilyn returned, carrying tissues and a plastic bag. "Here are these wet sheets," she said, handing them to Holly. "We will be landing in 15 minutes. Please keep your seatbelts on." As Holly sorted through the pile of papers to see what could be saved, Caleb had an idea. "Holly, do you still have a copy of the presentation on your laptop or phone?" Caleb asked. "I have the presentation," Holly sighed, "but the notes and last-minute edits are all on that pile of paper." She bit her lip in confusion. "I can present without them," she hesitated, "but it certainly won't be as complete as I'd like." "When we land, I have a document scanning app on my phone," Caleb suggested. "We can quickly save anything legible before you get to college. You're so kind, but—" Before Holly could refuse, Gerald interjected, "I have a suite at the Avalon Hotel, just 10 minutes from the airport. There is a business center with printers and scanners. You can use it to refresh your documents before your presentation." Both Caleb and Holly were stunned by the suggestion. "That's very generous," Holly said softly, "but I don't want to bother." "It's no trouble at all," Gerald interrupted, his voice noticeably calmer. "Consider it making amends for the accident I caused. Besides," he glanced at Caleb, "this conversation with you guys has given me a lot to think about Logan." The plane descended, the landing gear screeching as it deployed, echoing heavily throughout the cabin. O'Hare Airport loomed vast, its terminals radiating like bicycle spokes, planes taxiing down gray concrete runways. "We are about to land," the captain's voice came over the loudspeaker. "The current temperature in Chicago is 70 degrees, partly cloudy. Local time is 3:05 p.m. Thank you for choosing our flight." As the plane banked toward touchdown, 3 passengers in row 17, Caleb, Gerald, and Holly, formed an unlikely alliance. Gerald's offer was more than just practical support. It was a sign of recognition of the fragile but sincere bond they had just formed. "I agree," Holly said firmly. "Thank you, Gerald." "Just call me Gerald," he smiled slightly. Caleb nodded in agreement. Once we get off the plane, we should move quickly. I'd also be happy to assist before stopping at Brookdale. The wheels hit the ground with a screech, and the engines roared as the brakes kicked in. The passengers leaned forward reflexively, eager to prepare for their new lives outside the plane doors. But for 3 people in row 17, the journey has really only just begun. An unexpected turn from a seemingly small spillage incident, leading to changes more profound than they could have imagined. "Welcome to O'Hare International Airport," the captain announced as the plane came to a stop. "Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign turns off." The familiar bell rang, followed by the clicking of seatbelts and the sound of passengers rummaging for their luggage. Although everyone was impatient, order in the cabin was maintained like an unwritten agreement between strangers. "I've booked a car," Gerald said as he gathered his luggage. "There's room to spare if you two want to ride together to Avalon." "Great." Holly carefully put the wet documents into a plastic bag. Caleb checked his watch. "I still have time before I have to go to Brookdale." "Thanks." As they got off the plane, Marilyn Carter wished them, "I hope you have an enjoyable conversation. Have a great trip in Chicago." They crossed the station corridors amid a rush of people, businessmen walking with purpose, families struggling with young children, lone travelers immersed in their own musical world. "My driver is waiting at the main entrance," Gerald explained as they took the escalator down to baggage claim. "Neither of you have any luggage to check in, right?" Both Caleb and Holly shook their heads. "Good. Then let's go straight out." At the exit, a driver in a neat uniform stood holding a sign that said Hopkins. He was in his 60s, with gray hair and a straight posture as if he had served in the army. "Welcome back to Chicago, Mr. Hopkins," he said politely, taking Gerald's briefcase. "The car is waiting in the pickup area." "Thank you, James. There will be 2 more guests accompanying me to Avalon," Gerald announced. "With pleasure, sir." They headed toward the shiny black Lincoln Navigator, James opening the back door for all 3 of them. "Please get in. Estimated ride is about 20 minutes, traffic permitting." Inside, the leather interior and cool air conditioning create a pleasant contrast to the cramped cabin. As the car rolled away from the airport, Gerald turned to Holly and asked, "So, tell me more about your research." "Can you tell me more about your presentation?" Caleb asked, his eyes filled with interest. "What was your main topic?" Holly straightened up, still feeling anxious about her damaged notes, and immediately switched to her familiar academic mode. "I'm researching how American identity has changed since 9/11, Holly explains, particularly through the lens of civil-military relations. Gerald nodded thoughtfully. "A rather ambitious topic." "A little too much, really," Holly chuckled, "at least according to some of my advisors. But I believe it's essential to understand the transformation of collective identity over decades of war." "So, what did you find out?" Caleb asked, genuinely interested. "This afternoon's presentation focuses on my preliminary findings," Holly replied. "The results show that while most Americans express respect for the military, the gap between service members and civilians is actually widening. Differences in values, concepts of duty, and understandings of sacrifice." Caleb nodded slowly. "That's true in my experience. Every time I return from the battlefield, I feel like I'm entering a world that operates by completely different rules." "What specifically makes you feel different?" Holly asked, her research instincts kicking in. Caleb considered for a moment. "Life comes first," he replied. "In the unit, the mission and comrades always come first. Personal desires are secondary. But back in civilian life, the pursuit of personal happiness is emphasized. That difference took me a long time to adjust to." "But you did it in the end," Holly commented. "Thanks to Sophia," Caleb smiled warmly. "Fatherhood gives me purpose beyond the uniform." Gerald, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. My dad never talked about what he went through in Vietnam, not once, but it was imprinted on everything, the discipline, the work ethic, and the distance. His voice softened, revealing a rare layer of emotion. It's that silence that I'm studying, Holly said, her eyes lighting up. How trauma and experience are internalized across generations and the impact it has on broader American culture. The car turned onto the Kennedy Expressway, joining the traffic rushing toward downtown Chicago. Through the window, the city skyline became clearer and clearer in the fading sunlight. If you don't mind, Caleb turned to Gerald. What is your son Logan doing at Wexford Park? The question might have made the atmosphere tense again, but Gerald's expression was one of exhaustion instead of anger. It's a mixologist, like a professional bartender, Gerald breathes. Started out as a regular bartender after dropping out of my MBA program, but then made a name for myself with my creative cocktail recipes. Sounds like a real job, Caleb commented, his voice full of goodwill. Gerald sighed. Maybe, but not what I expected. Especially after... He hesitated, his eyes staring out the window. After what? Holly suggested softly. There was a long silence, then Gerald spoke, his voice low. After all I sacrificed to give him a chance. His grandfather built the business from scratch. I grew it through recessions, market crashes, things that would have knocked down anyone less determined. All just so Logan could have the opportunities I never had. The car began to slow down, the city coming into clearer view. Maybe those opportunities have led to different values, Caleb suggested, his voice cautious. The measures of success are not the same as they were a generation ago. Or maybe he was just rebelling, Gerald countered, but this time there was no anger, just quiet sadness, taking the easy road and then justifying it as finding himself. Holly, still with her research instincts, quickly interjected. It's the shift in values across generations that's really fascinating. After World War II, success was defined by stability, wealth, and institutional achievements. For millennials and Gen Z, meaning in work is often more important than income. There's no point in mixing fancy cocktails, Gerald muttered, but it sounded more like a question than an assertion. How do you know that for sure? Caleb asked softly. Have you ever been to Logan's shop, seen what he does every day? Gerald was silent, and that silence answered. Sometimes, Caleb continued, we get so caught up in imposing our dreams on our children that we forget to listen to who they really are. The Lincoln pulled off the freeway and entered downtown Chicago. Glass and steel skyscrapers rose in the sunlight, casting long shadows across the road. We'll be in Avalon in about 5 minutes, James announced from the driver's seat. Gerald fell silent again, seemingly turning over the layers of old memories. Perhaps he recognized old patterns repeating themselves. Holly looked up, eyes sparkling at the magnificence of the city. It's overwhelming, she exclaimed. These structures, the vision behind them is incredible. My grandfather would agree, Gerald smiled sadly. He was a builder, working on the Tribune Tower in the 1920s. He used to say that every building was a testament to what people could achieve through collective effort. That philosophy shaped the early years of Hopkins builders, Gerald says, his eyes looking far away. The idea that we weren't just building houses, we were contributing to something bigger than ourselves. Sounds like meaningful work, Caleb commented. A goal that goes beyond mere profit. That's true, Gerald admits. My dad always held on to that ideal, even as the company grew. We built schools, hospitals, community centers, social impact projects, in addition to commercial properties. So what now? Holly asked. A flash of hesitation crossed Gerald's face. The market has changed, he said. "Now, the growth is in high-end luxury commercial projects. However, we still maintain the Hopkins Fund to support affordable housing development." The answer sounded like he had said it to himself countless times, Caleb thought. The Lincoln Navigator pulled into the arched entrance of the Avalon Hotel, where uniformed staff quickly opened doors and took luggage. The limestone facade of the opulent hotel towered high, flags flapping in the breeze from the lake. "Welcome back, Mr. Hopkins," the doorman greeted with a smile as he opened the car door. "Thank you, Michael. Is my usual room ready?" "Yes, sir. Everything is prepared as requested." Gerald turned to Caleb and Holly as the three of them got out of the car. "Let's go to the business center now. It's on the mezzanine floor. The Avalon lobby exudes understated luxury. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and vases of fresh flowers fill the air. Staff move gently, calling guests by name naturally, anticipating their needs before they speak. As they passed the elevator area, a hotel manager quickly approached. "Good afternoon, Mr. Hopkins. Mr. Logan just called to change his appointment from 4 to 5. He asked me to pass on the message." Gerald's face tensed for a moment, but then he forced a smile. "Very good. Please tell him so." Entering the elevator, Caleb noticed a slight change in the way Gerald acted, a man all too accustomed to being quick to adapt and keeping his emotions hidden. "So he's still coming, just on his schedule," Caleb commented lightly. "Seems so," Gerald nodded, pressing the mezzanine button. A small victory in the big picture. The elevator took them to the mezzanine, opening onto a wood-paneled lobby decorated with original paintings and vintage furniture. Gerald led the way to the business center, where a brisk attendant greeted them. "Hello, Mr. Hopkins. Nice to see you again. How may we help you today?" "This is my guest." Gerald pointed toward Holly. "Miss Anderson needs to scan and reprint some water-damaged documents. Provide her with any technical support she needs." "Of course, sir. Please use the space. The business center is a classic place, wood paneling, large conference tables, separate printing areas, but equipped with the latest technology." "Feel free to use whatever you need," Gerald said to Holly. "I'll have them bring more water and coffee." "I really appreciate it." Holly smiled sincerely, quickly grabbing a workstation. Caleb glanced around the room. "Let me help you sort through the notes that are still legible. We can scan those pages, then rebuild the presentation." For the next 45 minutes or so, the three of them worked together surprisingly well. Caleb scanned the damaged pages on his phone, while Holly typed quickly to restore the presentation. Gerald sat in the corner, making a few phone calls, occasionally stepping in to offer suggestions when Holly was stuck for ideas. "The main evidence for the change in civilian values is in the longitudinal survey data," Holly muttered as she scanned a smudged page. "But I can't see the exact percentages here." "What survey are you talking about?" Caleb asked. "I might know. Pew Research 2022. Survey of the Civilian-Military Gap." Caleb nodded immediately. "If I remember correctly, about 91% of Americans expressed pride in the military, but only 33% correctly identified the current deployment location." Holly's eyes widened in surprise. "Exactly. How did you know? I used to work as a consultant for the Veterans Reintegration Program after discharge. That survey is cited quite a lot." Gerald, who had hung up by now, walked over. "How are things going?" "Better than I thought," Holly replied, beaming. "I think I'll be done in time for my presentation." "So what's the key point from your research?" Gerald asked, leaning lightly on the edge of the table. "If you had to distill it down to a single statement?" Holly thought seriously about the question. "That America is torn between two models of service," she replied. "One based on traditional sacrifice for the good of the group, and one that emphasizes individual fulfillment and personal meaning. Neither is necessarily superior, but the tension between them defines much of today's cultural divide. Gerald nodded slowly, probably including the conflict between me and my son. This candid and self-aware admission took Caleb by surprise, from someone who had previously been so rigid and judgmental. As Holly finished her presentation materials, a hotel staff member brought over a tray of tea, coffee, and small cakes. The simple gesture further cemented the unexpected bond between the three strangers. "Tell me more about your veteran consulting work," Gerald said as the three of them sat around the conference table. "What exactly do you do?" "I help military members transition to civilian life," Caleb explains, "from transferring skills to their resumes to coaching them on how to adapt to the corporate world, which operates very differently from the military system." "It must have been difficult," Gerald commented, "adjusting from a highly structured environment to the ambiguity of civilian life." "That's right," Caleb nodded. "Many people struggle with finding new purpose. In the military, the mission is clear. In real life, there are very few specific goals." Gerald's face suddenly became pensive. "My dad said the same thing about the time after returning from Vietnam. It took him years to find his footing again. Building the company became his new mission, something he devoted his energy to." "It's a common pattern," Caleb admits. "You have to find a new mission to replace the old one." "What about you?" Gerald asked, his voice sincere. "What became your goal, besides taking care of your daughter?" The question is personal, showing genuine interest rather than being polite. "Helping other veterans find their footing," Caleb replied after a moment of thought. "Based on the lessons I learned myself." Gerald nodded slowly. "Continue serving, just change the setting? A kind of military spirit transfer into civilian life?" "I think so," Caleb smiled, slightly surprised by the subtlety of Gerald's observation. Holly, while sorting through the documents, interjected, "That pattern comes up very often in my research. People who are successful in transition are often those who retain their core values but are flexible enough to adapt to the new environment." "Maybe that explains Logan's resistance," Gerald muttered to himself. "If the values I try to convey don't really touch it." He trailed off, but Caleb sensed it, an understanding taking root. Caleb glanced at his watch. "I should go. Sophia's gown ceremony starts at 6. "Let driver James take you," Gerald suggested. "Very well, but I don't mind the extra trouble," Caleb politely declined. "It's fine. Anyway, after this conversation, I want to hear news from the ceremony." Gerald turned to Holly. "As for you, Brookdale University is in the opposite direction. I will have someone call a private car for you." "You've really helped me a lot," Holly said sheepishly. "Consider it a small investment in intergenerational understanding," Gerald smiled sincerely, "and a little atonement for the water spill." The three quickly arranged for the recovered documents. Their relationship had come a long way since their first meeting on Flight 1157, from awkward courtesy to a genuine, if tenuous, bond. Before parting, Holly gave the two men a light hug. "Thank you both so much. Not only did you save my presentation, but you also broadened my research perspective." "Good luck," Caleb encouraged. "Remember to send me the finished copy when it comes out," Gerald reminded her, handing her his card. "I'd love to read the whole thing." As Holly left in a private car provided by the hotel, Gerald and Caleb walked side by side through the Avalon lobby to the waiting navigator. "I have a favor to ask," Gerald said softly as he neared the door. "A rather unusual story." "What's going on?" Caleb asked. "Would you be willing to join me at the hotel bar for a meeting with Logan at 5? The offer didn't come easily," Caleb sensed Gerald's pride was on the line in search of help. Caleb hesitated for a moment at Gerald's suggestion. "It's a family matter, very private," he considered. "Are you sure you want strangers involved?" "I'm not sure about anything anymore," Gerald admitted. "Only that if I keep doing the same thing, the result will be the same. And this time, I want to be different." Caleb ponders the need to get to Brookdale on time for Sophia's gown ceremony and the unexpected opportunity to help mend a broken family. "I need to be at Brookdale by 5:45, he said finally. "But if you need me, I can stay a while." A flash of relief crossed Gerald's face. "Thanks. I'm not sure it will change anything, but I want to try something different." As James opened the car door for them, Caleb Johnson and Gerald Hopkins's relationship changed dramatically, from the initial tension on Flight 1157 to a nascent understanding. That afternoon slowly peeled back Gerald's hard shell, revealing his inner anxieties, affection, and desire for change. What neither of them knew was this: this brief encounter would lead them to a moment that would challenge the very prejudices they had been unaware of. The Avalon Hotel bar is the epitome of classic elegance: soft lighting, comfortable leather chairs, and shelves displaying fine bottles under warm yellow lights. 4:55 p.m. Caleb and Gerald sat in a quiet corner, each holding a glass. Gerald had bourbon, and Caleb just ordered mineral water. "He's usually late," said Gerald, glancing at his watch 3 times in just 10 minutes. "It's his personal statement." "Tell me about Logan," Caleb suggested. "Not his flaws, but who he is," Gerald pondered, swirling the glass of bourbon in his hand. "He was very sensitive and creative from a young age. Elizabeth, his mother, always encouraged that side, teaching piano, drawing, art. And I pushed him into sports, math." He smiled sadly. "He's good at everything he tries, but because of that, it's hard to choose a direction. Too many possibilities, lack of focus." "That doesn't sound like a problem," Caleb commented. "Sounds like a talented young man." "Maybe," Gerald admitted, "but in business, in life, specialization is important. Excellence requires focusing on one path." "Are you sure?" Caleb smiled slightly. "The best SEALs I served with were the ones who could play classical piano, speak 3 languages, and still be the best marksman on the team. It was that diversity that made them invaluable." Gerald nodded slightly, reluctantly accepting. "That makes sense. But Logan never took anything seriously enough, until bartending." "How long has it been?" Caleb asked. "Almost 3 years." Gerald was stunned for a moment, as if realizing it for the first time. "Longer than anything it's ever been after," Caleb pointed out. "Shows commitment." "Probably." Gerald sipped his bourbon. "Elizabeth, her mother, reminded me to take that career choice more seriously. Are you and your ex-wife still close to your son?" "They were very close," Gerald replied. "Elizabeth understood him better than I ever did. Always has." His voice was regretful. "The divorce was amicable, but it created a boundary. On one side was Elizabeth and Logan, on the other was me. Different values, different outlooks on life." "It must have been hard," Caleb said softly. "It's easier than burying my head in work," Gerald sighed. "Where I know the rules, clear and easy to control. Being a father has never come naturally to me, the way it seems easy to you." The sincerity in Gerald's words, a man who once exuded toughness, revealed the unseen depths of his soul. "Nobody's a natural," Caleb replied. "We all fumble, make mistakes, and adjust. I was just lucky to have a military structure that guided me. But raising a teenage daughter while rotating between bases was harder than the toughest training." That sincere reply made Gerald laugh softly, for the first time since they met. The conversation was interrupted when a young man entered the bar. Tall, slim, Gerald's sharp features softened by his medium-length hair and trimmed beard. His gray shirt sleeves were rolled up to reveal his arms, covered in intricate tattoos. His eyes darted around the room, then caught sight of his father. Gerald waved, and Logan stepped forward, his eyes surprised to see Caleb. "Hey, Dad," he greeted Gerald, then glanced at Caleb questioningly. "Logan, this is Caleb Johnson," Gerald introduced. "We met on the flight from Hartford." Caleb shook Logan's hand, a firm but somewhat hesitant one. "Nice to meet you," Logan said, taking the empty chair. "Are you my dad's business partner?" "No," Caleb smiled. "Just a flight companion with a lot of memorable stories." Logan raised his eyebrows slightly, an unmistakable gesture, identical to Gerald's. "My dad rarely invites companions to these meetings," Logan said, half joking, half probing. Logan raised an eyebrow at his father and then glanced at Caleb. "My father doesn't normally invite strangers to these meetings," he said, his voice laced with fatigue. "Caleb is here at my invitation," Gerald corrected. "I thought it would be helpful to have another perspective." Logan leaned back in his chair, his eyes surveying the two of them. "So this is an intervention? Didn't Dad tell you all about the loser son who's wasting his talent, neglecting the Hopkins legacy, just to mix cocktails?" "Logan," Gerald interrupted, his voice warning. But Caleb kept his cool, interjecting gently. "Actually," he said, "your dad mentioned that you've been making quite a splash with your cocktail creations. I'm really curious to hear more." The unexpected approach made Logan pause. He glanced at his father, seeing Gerald only nod slightly. "I specialize in botanical infusions and historical cocktail recreations," Logan began slowly. "I research lost recipes from before Prohibition, then adapt them to modern tastes." "Sounds like academic work," Caleb remarked. "Historical research, chemistry experiments, art exhibitions?" Logan relaxed his shoulders a little. "Yeah," he nods. "I'm also writing a book about regional variations of classic cocktails, how one drink might look different in New Orleans, Chicago, New York. I'm focused on that project right now." "A book?" Gerald's voice betrayed surprise. "I never said anything." "I never asked," Logan replied, softly but heavily. The sentence hung between them, a simple yet profound truth about the father-son relationship. A waitress approached. "What would you like?" "Give me a Fitzgerald," Logan replied. As the waitress left, Gerald cleared his throat. "Logan, we need to talk about your apartment." Caleb sensed the change in atmosphere, knowing that the topic was likely to lead to conflict. He quickly interjected. "Wait," Caleb suggested. "I really want to hear more about your book. Have you signed a publishing deal yet?" Logan hesitated, then nodded. "Signed with Mitchell and Harper 6 months ago. Not much advance, but the book will be part of their culinary history collection." Gerald's face showed genuine shock. "You signed a publishing deal? Why didn't you say so?" "Because I know what you're going to say," Logan replied, his voice strained again. "That it's not a serious career, just a hobby, not worthy of the Hopkins name." The waitress returned, placing an exquisite cocktail in front of Logan in a classic coupe glass, garnished with a slender lemon peel. Gerald breathed heavily, clearly struggling internally. Finally, he asked, "When is the book coming out?" "April next year," Logan replied. "Will there be a launch event?" Logan was momentarily surprised, not expecting that question. "Yes," he replied. "It debuted in Chicago, then New York and San Francisco." Gerald nodded slowly. "Dad wants to attend the premiere in Chicago." The word hung in the air. Not quite an olive branch, but a small attempt to step forward. Logan studied his father's face, searching for the familiar sign of criticism, but this time he saw none. Only sincerity. "Okay," Logan replied. "What's the name of the book?" Caleb asked, realizing the fragile moment that was unfolding. "Liquid Legacy, America's Forgotten Cocktail." "Heritage," Logan replied, pride evident in his voice. "It surveys the evolution of American drinking culture from colonial saloons through Prohibition to the modern mixology renaissance." "Sounds interesting," Gerald admitted, his surprise evident. "Really," Logan insisted. "Did you know the Manhattan was created for Winston Churchill's mother's party in 1874? Or was the cocktail recipe more complicated during Prohibition to mask the poor quality of bootleg liquor?" As Logan continued to explain the historical significance of American cocktail culture, the initial reticence melted away. Before them now stood a true expert, passionate and deeply knowledgeable about his field. Gerald listened, occasionally asking questions, no longer skeptical, but genuinely interested. Caleb watched quietly, noticing something familiar. Every child craves recognition from their parents. As Logan mentioned Esquire magazine, recognition dawned on Gerald's face. "I remember that one," he said slowly. "My father rarely drank, but he appreciated the historical value of that book." "Exactly," Logan replied, his voice growing excited. "It's not just about drinks. It's about culture, geography, international diplomacy, what people consume and why. I've been fascinated by it since I was a kid, but I never dared to mention it because I thought you wouldn't approve," Gerald finished quietly. Logan nodded. For the first time in years, father and son seemed to see each other more fully, an acknowledgment of the underlying dynamics that had long governed their relationship. Caleb silently felt the weight of the moment. He discreetly checked his watch, knowing he needed to leave soon to make Sophia's initiation. "I should probably go," he said quietly. "My daughter's white coat ceremony starts at 6. "The coat ceremony?" Logan asked, his eyes filled with curiosity. "That's right," Caleb nodded. "Today, Sophia officially received her first white coat, symbolizing the beginning of her medical journey." "Impressive," Logan commented sincerely. "She's certainly dedicated." "Very dedicated," Caleb confirmed, pride shining in his eyes. "Just like how your father described your dedication to your craft." The meaning of the sentence hung between them. Gerald cleared his throat and changed the subject. "About your apartment?" He hesitated. "I told you I'm working on it," Logan replied quickly. "The rent went up unexpectedly, but I got 2 consulting contracts for new restaurants in the West District. The income from their beverage program will more than make up for it." "Counseling?" Gerald repeated, as if the word had never been associated with his son. Logan nodded. "Each project starts at $5,000 plus a percentage of first-year specialty cocktail sales." Those numbers obviously caused Gerald to reconsider his entire assumption about Logan's financial situation. "I see," he finally said. "I don't need financial help, Dad," Logan added, his voice calm. "I just want to share my life with you. Telling you doesn't always mean asking for money." Gerald took in this information, and Caleb saw the quiet rebalancing in his eyes. "Sorry to assume that," Gerald said. A simple apology, but coming from Gerald Hopkins, it carried special weight. "Your knowledge and skills are clearly valuable," he continued, gesturing to the exquisite cocktail in front of Logan. I was too quick to underestimate them. The surprise on Logan's face was evident. "Thanks, Dad," he replied, his voice small but sincere, the thanks meaning more than it appeared. Caleb glanced at his watch again. "I really need to go," he said. "Of course," said Gerald. James is waiting to take you to Brookdale." Caleb stood up, holding out his hand to Logan. "Nice to meet you. Your work sounds really cool, at the intersection of history, chemistry, and art." Logan shook hands firmly. "Thank you, and thank you for everything you did today." His eyes turned to his father, holding many things unsaid. "Sometimes all we need is a different perspective," Caleb replied, smiling. Gerald also stood up. "I'll see you out," he said. Together they walked through the luxurious lobby of the Avalon Hotel. "The closer you get to someone," Caleb said quietly on the way to the car, "the harder it is to see them. Everyone has blind spots, Gerald, even me." "You too?" Gerald asked, not hiding his genuine curiosity. "Absolutely," Caleb nodded. "It took me years to understand that Sophia wasn't a carbon copy of my dreams. She had her own journey, and my job was to support her, not lead her." James was waiting, opening the navigator's door. Before Caleb entered, Gerald handed him a business card. "I'd love to hear about your daughter's graduation," he said, "and if possible, to keep in touch." "I hope so," Caleb replied, taking the card. As the car glided through the busy Chicago traffic, Caleb leaned back, deep in thought. An ordinary flight led him on an extraordinary journey. Invisible bridges were built across differences of background, of perspective, of generation. He texted Jessica. "On my way to Brookdale. We'll be there in time. Sophia ready?" What Caleb doesn't know is that his chance encounter with Gerald Hopkins will leave an even deeper mark on his life, and on the lives of the people he's just met. Before getting out of the car, Caleb adjusted the lapels of his suit jacket, wanting to look presentable for Sophia's big day. Other parents and families were also bustling into the Brookdale entrance, all dressed in formal attire, holding bouquets of flowers or gift bags. He checked his phone and saw a message from Jessica. "We're in the lobby near the faculty portrait wall. Sophia is backstage with the guys." Caleb made his way through the vast, light-filled hall, searching for the familiar silhouette of his ex-wife. Though their marriage had ended 15 years earlier, they had maintained a respectful relationship over their shared love for Sophia. He quickly spotted Jessica standing near a wall of portraits of past deans and presidents, powerful, stern faces framed in gold. At 51, Jessica was still striking. Her dark hair, streaked with natural gray, was cut in an elegant bob, and her wine-colored dress was both formal and fresh. "Caleb," she waved, her smile wide. "There you are." "Nothing can make me miss today," Caleb replied, giving her a quick, warm hug. "How is she? Nervous?" "Surprisingly not," Jessica laughed. "You know, Sophia, she's been preparing for this day since she was little." She watched him intently, her eyes as keen as they had been when she was an intelligence analyst before she switched to healthcare management. "You look like you had an enjoyable day?" Caleb chuckled softly. "Is it that obvious?" "It's always been clear to me." "What happened?" "It's a long story. Meeting on the plane. I'll tell you later." Caleb glanced around the lobby, which was getting more crowded by the minute. "Are your parents here yet?" "They're sitting in the hall," Jessica nodded. "They flew in yesterday." Jessica's parents, William and Barbara Harris, have always been incredibly supportive of Sophia, even after their divorce. William, a renowned cardiologist who was a huge inspiration to Sophia in her medical career, patiently answered her thousands of curious questions, a patience Caleb sometimes admits he lacks. An announcement came over the loudspeaker system. "Ladies and gentlemen, the white coat ceremony will begin in 15 minutes. Please enter the auditorium and take your seats." The crowd slowly moved toward the double doors, where the staff was broadcasting the show. Caleb and Jessica joined the crowd, finding her parents already seated in the front row. a perk of being early birds. "Caleb, it's good to see you again." William stood up and shook his hand warmly. Even at 78, he still had the healthy, sharp look of a top professional. "William, Barbara," Caleb replied, shaking Barbara's hand affectionately. "Thank you for saving the seats. We can't miss our granddaughter's big day," Barbara smiled, patting the seat next to her. "Sit down and tell us about your flight." Once settled, Caleb began to recount his unexpected encounters with Gerald and Holly, the chance but meaningful conversations that had taken him from Hartford Airport to the Avalon Hotel, and then all the way here. "Sounds like a real adventure," William remarked. "That Gerald reminds me of some of my old colleagues, brilliant doctors who couldn't understand their own children." "He's actually deeper than he appears," Caleb replied. "At the end of the day, I think he's really trying to understand his son better." "It's hard," Barbara added. "When our children take different paths than we expect, we're often blind to it." Jessica nodded. "Remember when Sophia said she wanted to join Doctors Without Borders after graduation? The look on your face. I wish I had taken a picture." "I accepted it," Caleb laughed defensively. "Almost completely." "Parents are always worried," William said. "Even I worry about Jessica, a successful healthcare executive with grandchildren." "Dad!" Jessica laughed in cute protest. The conversation paused as the lights in the auditorium dimmed. The president of Brookdale Medical stepped up to the podium, and the room fell silent. "Welcome, families, friends, faculty, and especially our new medical students," she began, her voice warm. "Today marks an important transition in the lives of these young people, as they accept both the great privilege and responsibility of the medical profession." As the principal continued speaking, Caleb felt a surge of emotion. The road to this moment has been long and arduous. He recalls that year in Kandahar when he was severely injured by an IED blast that changed his life and quietly shaped his daughter's future. He remembered the night before that business trip when 14-year-old Sophia quietly handed him a crude bracelet, woven from thread herself. "To protect you," she said, her eyes serious beyond her years. "Promise me you'll wear it until you come home." The bracelet, miraculously, survived the explosion intact, a small miracle amid the chaos, which Sophia believes is a fateful sign of her life-saving mission. The ceremony continued with an emotional speech about medicine as an intersection of science and deep human connection. Then the most awaited moment arrived, the white coat ceremony. "As I read your names, please come up to the stage to receive your white coat from your faculty. This coat symbolizes the trust that society places in you and your lifelong commitment to care, compassion, and the highest ethical standards," the principal explained. One by one, each student stepped forward in alphabetical order, was personally capped by the lecturer, then turned to the audience with proud smiles before leaving the stage. Caleb felt a lump in his throat as he watched the scene. Young people embarking on a journey to heal their lives. He wondered, if his father, a Korean War veteran, were alive, what would he think if his granddaughter Sophia chose medicine over the military, a family tradition that had been passed down for generations? Johnson's family has served in uniform for generations. Sophia, by choosing to pursue a career in medicine, has ushered in a new kind of service, different, but no less noble. "Sophia Johnson," a voice called from the podium. Caleb felt his heart tighten with pride. He watched his daughter walk gracefully across the stage, each gesture a reflection of the discipline he inherited and her own compassionate intelligence. The instructor draped a white coat over Sophia's shoulders. She turned to the audience, her smile as bright as the morning sun. That moment brought Caleb back to the memory of years ago. In a cramped hospital room at Walter Reed, the 10-year-old girl had solemnly declared, I'm going to be a doctor to treat soldiers like you." Over the years, through the painful days of recovery, through divorce, through the challenges of single parenthood, that will has never wavered. As Sophia stepped off the stage, Jessica gently squeezed Caleb's hand, a silent recognition of the greatest accomplishment they had built together. The rest of the ceremony was solemn, as the principal invited the new students to recite the Hippocratic Oath in unison, a moral pledge passed down thousands of years ago. As the ceremony ended, crowds of family and friends rushed to their feet, searching for familiar faces among the sea of white shirts. Caleb, Jessica, and her parents headed to the refreshment area where students and families took souvenir photos, chatted, and shared joy. They quickly spotted Sophia, standing with her new group of friends. Her white shirt stood out against her tanned skin, and her smile was radiant as she introduced her friends to another family. Seeing her family, Sophia immediately asked permission from her friends and ran over. "Dad, you're here!" she cried, hugging Caleb tightly, then turning to hug her mother and grandparents. "Of course," Caleb replied, taking his daughter by the shoulders with both hands and looking her up and down. "Dr. Johnson sounds cool." "Not officially, Dad," Sophia giggled. "There are still 4 years of school and boarding left." "You'll get over it," William encouraged, his eyes full of pride. "And we'll always be here for you," Barbara added, adjusting the collar of Sophia's white blouse with her soft grandmotherly hands. As they talked, Caleb instinctively scanned the room, a vigilant habit ingrained from his years in the military. His eyes stopped when he noticed a familiar figure near the refreshment table. Gerald Whitmore, his reluctant flight companion, was standing there with Tyler and a woman in her 50s, elegantly dressed with sharp features that resembled Gerald's, but were softer. "Dad, who are you looking at?" Sophia asked when she noticed his gaze. "Oh," Caleb said, surprised. "That's the guy Dad just met on the plane. Didn't expect to see him here." "Small world," Jessica commented. "Friends of other students?" Before he could answer, Gerald recognized Caleb, smiled, and walked over with his companions. "Caleb," he held out his hand. "I hope to see you back here." "Gerald?" Caleb replied, surprised and pleased. "I had no idea you had a connection to Brookdale Medical." "Yes, it was a long time ago," Gerald nodded, then turned to Sophia. "Congratulations, freshman. I'm Gerald Whitmore. I had a very meaningful conversation with your father on the plane today." He pointed to his companions. "This is my son, Tyler, who Caleb has heard about. And this is my ex-wife, Dr. Victoria Whitmore." As everyone shook hands and greeted each other, Caleb happened to notice the sign hanging behind Gerald. The inscription stands out on the bronze background: Whitmore Center for Cardiothoracic Research. A light of understanding flashed through Caleb's mind. "Cardiovascular Research Center," he muttered. "So that's your connection to this school." Gerald nodded. "Victoria was a cardiothoracic surgeon here for 20 years. We funded the establishment of the research center in 2010. Jessica interjected, "And where do you work now?" "I'm in charge of thoracic surgery at the University of Chicago," Victoria replied, smiling kindly. "It's nice to meet your family." As soon as the words Whitmore Center for Cardiothoracic Research caught Caleb's eye, the connection suddenly occurred to him. "Center for Cardiothoracic Research," he muttered. "So that's how you got to know Brookdale Medical." Gerald nodded in confirmation. "Victoria was a cardiothoracic surgeon here for 20 years. My family funded the establishment of the research center in 2010. Jessica asked curiously, "Where do you work now?" "I head the Department of Thoracic Surgery at the University of Chicago," Victoria replied, smiling warmly. At this point, William Harris, Jessica's father, stepped forward. "Dr. Victoria Whitmore, I once cited your research on minimally invasive heart valve replacement in a scientific paper. William Harris, from Johns Hopkins? Victoria asked again, her eyes lighting up. It is me, he nodded. I know your paper on post-operative arrhythmia management. It changed our entire practice, Victoria said sincerely. As the doctors quickly fell into technical conversation about medical advances, Caleb turned to Gerald. I'm surprised to see you here, he said quietly. I thought you'd be talking to Tyler again. We talked, Gerald confirmed, and that conversation brought us here, miraculously. Tyler, who had been quiet until now, added, When he mentioned your daughter's white coat ceremony, I thought my mother would want to attend. She has mentored many faculty members here and has always been very supportive of female medical students. Tyler was the one who suggested we come, Gerald continued. He said maybe this would help me understand more about following my heart instead of other people's expectations. The hidden meaning behind the statement did not escape Caleb's eyes. And what did you learn? Caleb asked. Gerald scanned the hall, the young students in their white gowns, the families filled with pride, the air filled with hope. That perhaps I was measuring success by too narrow a yardstick, he mused. He glanced at Tyler, his gaze filled with something like respect. That dedication comes in many different forms. Victoria, overhearing the conversation, gently placed her hand on Gerald's arm in a gesture of approval and surprise. The moment revealed a complicated history between them, deep disagreements over how to raise their son that had once driven them apart. Sophia, who had been listening intently, turned to Tyler with genuine concern. Your dad mentioned you were a mixologist. It sounds complicated, like a miniature form of chemistry. Yes, Tyler chuckled, his satisfaction evident. It requires precision, experimentation, and understanding the interactions between ingredients, just like medicine. I'd love to hear more, Sophia enthuses. I'm particularly interested in how classic recipes have evolved over time. It's like tracing cultural DNA. The two young people quickly fell into a lively conversation about the strange similarities between two seemingly unrelated fields. Caleb and Gerald moved aside slightly. Your daughter is admirable, Gerald said sincerely. You must be so proud. Very proud, Caleb confirmed, his eyes sparkling. But that intelligence and drive are all hers. I've come to understand that children need to choose their own paths, not live according to our expectations. Gerald nodded, his voice slow. A lesson that every parent must eventually learn, some sooner, some later. I was a late bloomer, Gerald admitted, his shoulders slumping. My dad was so rigid, the expectations were clear, the disappointments were clear. I grew up assuming that was the only way to love and parent. This honesty shows that Gerald has changed a lot from the rigid, prejudiced man Caleb first met on the flight. It's never too late to change direction, Caleb encourages. As long as the motivation comes from love, not control. Gerald mused. I'm just beginning to understand that difference. Just then, Victoria stepped forward and suggested, Gerald, I think we should invite Caleb and the family over for dinner to celebrate Sophia's white coat and Tyler's book deal. Gerald lit up, clearly accepting the idea. Great suggestion. What do you think, Caleb? Just a quick meal. Tyler knows a restaurant nearby. The invitation surprised Caleb, but also touched him. That's a very generous invitation, but I'm afraid I'll be disturbing your family party. No problem, Victoria smiled warmly. After what Gerald told me about your conversation, I would love to continue. She gently pointed toward Sophia and Tyler, who were chatting animatedly, seemingly oblivious to the time. And it seems your daughter and our son have found common ground as well. Let me ask my family, Caleb replied. He turned to Jessica and her parents, explaining the surprise invitation. After a quick discussion, mostly out of curiosity about Caleb's exciting adventure today, they happily agreed. The scene continued to bustle around them, families filled with joy, students eagerly taking souvenir photos. In this moment of new beginnings, an unexpected bond is also forming between the Johnsons and the Whitmores, a bridge across differences in experience, generation, and outlook on life. A bridge that began with a seemingly innocuous encounter on Flight 1157. The chance encounter on Flight 1157 evolved into something neither of them expected, an opportunity to look beyond initial judgments and discover the hidden depths of humanity within each person, if only we took the time to listen. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe and comment to let us know where you're watching from. The host's voice rang out over the festive atmosphere as the party began to wind down, with guests leaving one by one for restaurants or hotels. Caleb quietly reflected on the day's unexpected chain of events. What started as a simple flight had turned into a series of meaningful connections and revelations. "We should go," Jessica reminded, glancing at her watch. "Reservations for 8. "Right," Caleb nodded, turning to Gerald and his family. "We have dinner plans to celebrate Sophia's milestone. It's great to see everyone today." "The universe works in strange ways," Victoria smiled. "Even as a surgeon, I prefer logical explanations." "In any case, I'm glad I had this opportunity," Gerald said, extending his hand to shake Caleb's. "Today's conversation has given me a lot to think about." As they said goodbye, Tyler walked up to Sophia. "I was going to ask," Tyler said eagerly, "would your family like to stop by my bar while you're in Chicago? I could prepare a special set of non-alcoholic herbal drinks. Maybe the medical profession would find them interesting." "I would love to," Sophia replied without hesitation. "Dad, is tomorrow okay?" Before he could answer, Gerald interrupted with a surprising suggestion. "Actually, why not make it a small party? I'll book a private room at Tyler's bar and have a proper celebration of Sophia's white coat and Tyler's book deal." Gerald's change in attitude, from looking down on his son's profession to taking the initiative to celebrate, silenced the group for a moment. "Really?" Tyler asked, clearly surprised. "Very seriously," Gerald confirmed. "If you're willing to organize it." Tyler's face lit up. "It would be an honor," he said, grinning. "The private room at the Botanical would be perfect for our group." Plans were quickly agreed upon. Everyone exchanged contact information and congratulated each other. As the Johnson family left Brookdale Medical to head to the restaurant, Jessica looked at Caleb with curiosity. "You met that man on the flight today?" she asked as they entered the parking lot. "And now we're going to celebrate at his son's bar?" "Today has been weird," Caleb admitted, "but there's something about these connections that doesn't feel entirely random." Jessica, with the sharp intuition that Caleb always admired, smiled. "I think I understand why," she said. "Gerald reminds me of you back when Sophia first said she wanted to be a doctor instead of a career in the military." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Are you that stubborn?" "You have very clear ideas about the path to success," Jessica repeated softly. "It took you a while to accept that she doesn't need to repeat your journey to be worthy of pride." The comment left Caleb a little confused. "I guess," he admitted. "We all have blind spots, and sometimes we need someone to help us see more clearly." William and Barbara, overhearing the conversation, added their opinions. "Parents always want to protect their children from making mistakes," says William. "The trick is knowing when a decision isn't a mistake, but simply a different path." "And that requires humility," Barbara added. "And humility doesn't always come easily to successful people like Caleb, or his new friend Gerald." Caleb shook his head and laughed. "We're not necessarily friends," If this isn't friendship, then what is? Jessica narrowed her eyes. You helped him reconnect with his son, and now both families are preparing a joint celebration. Sounds like the beginning of a friendship. That evening, in the cozy confines of a restaurant overlooking Lake Michigan, sparkling in the moonlight, the Johnson family gathered together. Sophia enthusiastically shares about her upcoming journey in medicine, the renowned doctors she'll study with, the cutting-edge research opportunities at Brookdale. Over a glass of red wine, Caleb couldn't help but think about today. Initial tension with Gerald, academic inspiration from Ellie, Tyler's passion for art. All of this challenged him, broadening his perspective on life and people. When dessert was served, Sophia turned to her father and asked with a mischievous look, "Dad, tell me, what happened on the flight that led to all this crazy stuff?" "What happened on the flight, Dad?" Sophia asked curiously as the family gathered after dinner. Caleb hesitated for a moment, considering how to tell the story. Just one of those chance meetings that ended up being so good. We started talking, and despite our different backgrounds, we found common ground. "I think it's more than that," Sophia nudged. "I see Gerald is very impressed with you." "We can all learn something from each other," Caleb replied tactfully. "Sometimes the right person, at the right time, the right conversation can change everything." Jessica, knowing her ex-husband all too well, glanced at him with a look that said, "This isn't over yet." But right now, the focus was still on Sophia's achievements. The next evening, the Johnsons headed to Botanical, Tyler's bar in Wicker Park. From the outside, the place looked rustic, with its small brass sign and dimly lit windows. But inside, the space was elegant, a mix of old and new. Rough brick walls, botanical drawings framed as works of art. The bottle display rack is as bright as a mini museum. Tyler greeted them warmly, leading the group to a private room where Gerald, Victoria, and, more surprisingly, Ellie Sanderson, were already present. "Ellie, how was your presentation?" Caleb asked, genuinely pleased to see the enthusiastic graduate student again. "Better than expected." Ellie beamed. "The judges even suggested including part of my research in an upcoming publication on civil-military relations. I am so grateful to you both." She glanced at Caleb and Gerald. "Don't say that," Gerald replied. "You're the one who put in the effort. We just contributed a small perspective." "Sometimes a well-timed perspective can change the whole situation," Ellie chuckled. "Oh, I hope you don't mind," she added. "When he called to thank me, Richard invited me to attend tonight." "Makes sense," Caleb reassured. The connections from Flight 1157 should be complete. After the introductions, Tyler stood up and presented his plan. "I've put together tasting kits, both alcoholic and non-alcoholic, that highlight the botanical foundations of modern mixology," he says, his eyes sparkling with passion. "Each drink is paired with a small dish, delicately calibrated to complement the flavors. Private room meticulously prepared. Classic glass. Small copper vases filled with fresh herbs. Illustrated cards explain each drink. Soft, warm lighting creates an intimate and elegant atmosphere." Before we begin, Gerald stood, raising his glass. "I would like to toast to Sophia Johnson, who has just begun her noble journey in medicine, and to Tyler Whitmore, who has opened my eyes to forms of excellence I had never recognized before. May your book enlighten others as it has enlightened me." Tyler nodded, eyes welling up with tears at the rare public recognition from his father. For new beginnings, Caleb raised his glass. "And unexpected connections," Ellie added. The sound of glasses clinking echoed in the warm air. A small moment but with great meaning, when strangers at first now sat at the same table as old friends. The party quickly turned into an art class. Tyler presents each cocktail with the passion of a knowledgeable instructor, explains the history, chemical transformations between ingredients, and cultural influences behind each drink. Sophia's non-alcoholic tasting set is impressive. Forest scent, blend of fir bark and juniper berries. Lemon blossom, combines hibiscus with lemongrass and a hint of ginger. Blackberry and sage, deep, surprising flavors. "It's amazing," William commented after enjoying a glass. "The balance, the finesse, it's really art." Even Gerald, who had looked down on his son's profession, couldn't hide his look of appreciation. "The term mixologist doesn't seem to describe what I do," Jessica comments. "It's like liquid gastronomy or cultural anthropology through drinks." Tyler smiles brightly. "That's right. Drinks are historical relics of agriculture, trade, social customs, even politics. Prohibition changed not only drinking patterns, but also gender roles and social language." Sophia flipped through the illustrated card attentively. "Have you ever thought about collaborating with medical historians? There are many points of intersection between traditional cocktails and ancient herbal medicines." Tyler looked surprised, then nodded. "No, but that's a great idea. Ancient pharmacists and apothecaries used to share many of the same techniques and ingredients." As the evening progressed, stories and laughter grew more natural among the seemingly strangers. Elizabeth and William discuss new advances in the field of cardiology. Barbara and Jessica talk about garden clubs. Sophia passionately questions Tyler about the physiological effects of herbal compounds, discovering many surprising parallels with the medical field. Caleb found himself sitting next to Gerald at the end of the table, both of them quietly observing the commotion around them. "I owe you an apology," Gerald said, his voice low. "About what?" Caleb asked. "On that flight," Gerald admitted, "I made shallow assumptions about you based on your appearance. I saw a black man in plain clothes, and I immediately put you into a bad stereotype. That made me ashamed." This frankness surprised Caleb, but also felt appreciated. "Everyone has biases," Caleb replied. "The question is whether we are willing to confront them and change them when the evidence confronts us." "When you mentioned your Navy service," Gerald continued, "I began to adjust my perception. But it wasn't until later that I really saw you as a person, not a label." "That's how growth happens," Caleb said softly. "One small adjustment at a time." Gerald chuckled sadly. Tyler also pointed out the same thing about how I viewed it. "I saw the label bartender, but forgot behind it was a person with many achievements." They both turned to watch Tyler working on an intricate brewing technique, while Sophia took notes engrossed in her small notebook, with the same seriousness she would in medical school. "They're more alike than you might think," Caleb observed. "They're both driven by mastery, both dedicated to their craft. And both," Gerald added, "challenged their father's initial prejudices." Across the table, Elizabeth was also observing the conversation. When the conversation paused, she leaned over and said in a teasing tone, "The most remarkable thing today," she smiled, "was that it took a stranger to get Richard to listen to what I've been saying for years about Tyler's talent. There was no harshness, just the truth spoken with the calm of a seasoned surgeon. Sometimes we are just more receptive to outside perspectives," Caleb suggested diplomatically. "Especially when that person is someone you respect," Elizabeth agreed, giving Gerald a meaningful look. Gerald nodded and smiled bitterly. "That's true. Or maybe Tyler's got better at expressing himself now. Or maybe I'm finally really listening." "Probably both," Elizabeth concluded. Change rarely comes from just one side. To close the party, Tyler ceremoniously brought out a special creation he called New Beginnings, a sophisticated, symbolic drink for each guest. The small white petals represent Sophia's blouse. The navy blue curas in the background symbolizes Caleb's military service. Each ingredient is skillfully combined, creating a complete visual and flavor story. As each person raised their glasses to say goodbye and promised to meet again, Caleb reflected. A chance seat on a flight opened up deep human connections, breaking down seemingly impenetrable barriers. The next morning, at Midway Airport preparing for his flight back to Virginia, Caleb's phone vibrated. A text message from Gerald. Have a safe trip. Our meeting has made me think a lot, not only about my relationship with Tyler, but also about the biases I had not realized. I am truly grateful for this unexpected gift. I hope we meet again, either in Philadelphia or Virginia. Caleb smiled and texted back. The change doesn't just come from you. Meeting Tyler made me realize that even though I support Sophia, I sometimes unconsciously impose traditional standards on her. We both have work to do. I look forward to continuing this conversation. Just then, another message popped up from Ellie. I just got compliments on my presentation from my supervisor. We are expanding it into a scientific paper. If you agree, I would love to conduct a formal interview to capture your valuable insights on the transition between military and civilian. Gerald. How initial prejudices are changed through honest dialogue, that's exactly what my research is exploring, Ellie said with a bright smile. Her academic enthusiasm gave Caleb a new perspective on his encounter with Gerald, what Ellie called the process of negotiating a cross-cultural American identity. Caleb quickly texted her agreement to the formal interview and put his phone away as the boarding announcement rang. As Flight 1273 prepared to take off, Caleb sat in a window seat, quietly observing the bustling activity on the runway. Next to him was an old woman, her hands knitting quickly, smiling kindly. "Going home?" she asked. "Yes," Caleb replied, "after a very special trip." "Chicago is great," she commented. "That's great, but it's not just the city." Caleb paused, thinking about how to phrase it. "Sometimes the most important journeys take place in conversations with strangers." The old lady smiled, her knitting still steady. "Oh, I know that. Been flying for 60 years. Met my best friend on the Seattle flight in 1982. You never know, the person in seat 17 could change your life." Caleb laughed. "Row 17. That's where my story begins." "Tell me," the old lady encouraged. "We have 4 hours left, and these socks aren't done yet." During the flight, Caleb told Dorothy, the old lady's name, the whole story. Initial confrontation with Gerald, conversations with Ellie, the accidental water spill led to the Peninsula Hotel, explore Tyler's passion, and a surprise celebration party at the Botanical. Dorothy listened with genuine interest, occasionally sharing her own stories of strange friendships born of flying. A Turkish archaeologist has changed her perspective on ancient history. A young programmer taught her to code when she was over 70 years old. A widow finds solace in a cross-Atlantic knitting class. Travel, Dorothy concluded, brings us into contact with people we would never normally meet. It strips away the filters we use to choose our companions. As the plane landed in Virginia, Caleb wondered how the ripples from Flight 1157 would affect his life in the future. 2 weeks later, Caleb received a package from Chicago. Inside was, the first proof copy of Liquid Heritage was sent by Tyler, a solemn dedication to Caleb, who unwittingly bridged the gap between father and son. The cocktail on page 142 was inspired by our meeting. It's called The Mediator, a balance between seemingly irreconcilable opposites. Thank you. Tyler Whitmore, Enterprise's letterhead. Caleb, I hope this letter reaches you when all is well. Tyler insisted on sending him the first copy off the press, and I saw this as the perfect excuse to continue our unfinished story. Since that meeting, I've made a few changes that might interest you. 1. I visited Botanical not as a father, but as a guest. I saw the respect Tyler received from his team and his clients, the wisdom and passion he brought to his work. It was a lesson in the deepest sense. 2. I began to look at other blind spots in my work and personal life. We initiated discussions within the company about diversifying our hiring and project selection. In addition to high-end projects, we are considering investing in community projects, true to the values my father first established. 3. Elizabeth and I established a scholarship fund at Brookdale Medical for medical students who aspire to serve underserved communities, directly inspired by Sophia's drive. I don't share these things to seek praise, but to show you how a chance encounter can lead to profound changes. Tyler also mentioned that Sophia might be interested in the intersection of traditional herbal medicine and modern pharmaceuticals. Elizabeth has several colleagues at the University of Chicago who specialize in this topic. I've included contact information if Sophia is interested in learning more. Finally, I'm planning on being in Richmond, Virginia next month for a new development project. If you have time, I'd love to continue that conversation. Over coffee or a cocktail, your choice. Sincerely, Gerald Whitmore. Caleb read the letter a second time, reflecting on the genuine change it represented. What had begun as a tense confrontation in row 17 had now evolved into something closer to a friendship, a connection based on mutual respect and a sense of common humanity, despite differences in background and perspective. During their weekly video call that evening, Caleb showed Sophia the letter. "Wow, Dad," she said after reading. "It seems like you made quite an impression on this man." "Impressions are mutual," Caleb admitted. "Meeting Tyler made me realize a few things about the father-son relationship." "What things?" Sophia asked, her eyes shining with curiosity. Caleb paused, considering carefully. Like Dad still unconsciously measures success based on standards that are important to him, not necessarily to me. He smiled and continued. "When you first mentioned wanting to join an international medical organization after graduation, the first thing that came to my mind was the risk, not the meaning behind it." Sophia burst out laughing. "I know, your face said it all. But you've changed, too." "Dad is still changing," Caleb corrected, "just like Gerald and Tyler. It's a journey, not a moment." "I appreciate the effort, Dad," Sophia replied, "and honestly, I'm glad you connected with him. It sounds like a real friendship." "Maybe so," Caleb admitted. "Life has a way of bringing people together for reasons we can never predict." Sophia suddenly remembered. Her face lit up. "Oh, Tyler just sent me some research papers on plant compounds used in early cardiovascular drugs. It's very relevant to mixology. We're tossing around ideas for an interdisciplinary project." "Great." Caleb was genuinely delighted. An unexpected partnership. "That's not all," Sophia smiled mischievously. "Tyler's mom, Victoria, introduced me to the head of cardiothoracic surgery at Brookdale. She thinks I have potential in that field." Caleb raised his eyebrows teasingly. "Has Elizabeth started interfering with your medical journey?" "Not intervention," Sophia corrected, "but counseling, just like Dad counsels veterans." Caleb laughed, once again surprised by his daughter's insight. In the following months, the connections from Flight 1157 continued to develop in unexpected ways. Ellie's research is widely recognized in academia, with her seminal paper American Civilian Military Identity, citing extensively the analysis of Caleb and Gerald. She won a prestigious scholarship to expand her research into a book. Both Caleb and Gerald agreed to participate in in-depth interviews. Tyler's book, Liquid Heritage, received positive reviews from both culinary and historical circles, cementing his position as a trusted expert. Gerald not only attended the book launch in Chicago, but also hosted a private party, publicly expressing his pride in his son's achievements. The friendship between Caleb and Gerald grows steadily, not only revolving around family, but also expanding to larger questions: social responsibility, community development, and how to leverage privilege to create positive change. 6 months later, Caleb received a surprise call from Gerald. "I'm forming an advisory board for a new initiative for Whitmore Enterprises," Gerald explains. "We want to convert abandoned buildings into community service centers, medical clinics, job training centers, micro-startup spaces. A pretty big step up from luxury condos," Caleb commented. "Yes," Gerald admitted, "but it was time. My father built homes for working families. Somewhere along the way, I lost that spirit. This is how I found my way back." Caleb smiled. "I am honored to be involved." "The first meeting is next month in Philadelphia," Gerald added. "Tyler will be there too. It turns out that historical research is very useful in designing modern community spaces." "Not surprising at all," Caleb replied. "Knowledge transcends all boundaries if we are open to it." Ending the call, Caleb leaned back in his chair, thinking about the strange chain of events. From a rough kick in the cabin, to a seemingly impossible conversation, and then become profound changes in many people's lives. Once again, he realized, sometimes it's the most uncomfortable moments that open the most beautiful doors. Caleb sat next to Jessica, looking out at the lights reflecting on Lake Michigan, his heart filled with emotion over what had happened over the past 2 years. "You know what surprised me the most?" Jessica asked, wrapping her arm around his. "What is it?" "It all started with a kick. If I hadn't sat in the wrong row that day, if Gerald hadn't misunderstood my backpack." Caleb laughed. "I had even forgotten about it. But yes, a spontaneous action led to it all." Jessica nodded. "I think that's the biggest lesson. Deep connections often start from unexpected collisions." Caleb agreed. "In the military or in everyday life, initial reactions often don't tell the whole story. It's how we react afterward that shapes everything." 2 years after that fateful day, Caleb stood at the podium of the Whitmore Johnson Community Center in a working-class neighborhood in North Philadelphia. Behind him, a red ribbon stretches across the entrance of the renovated building, a former archive turned multi-purpose center: free medical clinic, veterans support center, community education space, and the culinary training area specializes in historical food preservation methods. Caleb spoke to the crowd. "The Whitmore Johnson Center is more than just bricks and mortar. It's proof that unexpected connections can create unexpected possibilities." He looked at Gerald, who nodded proudly. From their initial disagreements, they had become true comrades. Gerald's business skills and financial resources, Caleb's community experience and spirit of service, together, they created what each individual could not have done alone. In the front row, Tyler Whitmore and Sophia Johnson, now colleagues on a research project on historical herbal remedies applied to modern medicine, sat together. Their relationship was not romantic love, but a deep intellectual friendship based on shared passion and mutual respect. Ellie Sanderson, now the author of a book on American identity after 9/11, a requirement in many sociology programs across the country, chronicles the event for her next chapter. As he finished his speech, scissors in hand, preparing to cut the red ribbon in front of the Whitmore Johnson Community Center, his eyes met Gerald Whitmore's. Without words, both of them understood the meaning of this moment. It was not just the opening of a building, but the result of a journey that began in row 17 of the fateful flight. From a tense confrontation to a collaboration that changed the lives of hundreds of people, their story has now become a symbol of the miracle that can happen when people overcome initial prejudices to seek common goals. "None of this would have happened," Caleb said, gesturing toward the building, "if two men on a plane hadn't been willing to look at their own prejudices." It's a reminder that life's most meaningful journeys often begin when we sit next to someone who challenges our perspective. The sound of scissors cutting ribbons rang out. The community poured into the new center, which will bring free health care, veteran support, educational opportunities, and job training to hundreds of local residents. Caleb stood back and watched, his heart filled with deep emotion. He understood that. The lesson is not to avoid conflict, but knowing how to use it as a catalyst for growth and connection. Flight 1157 was just the beginning of a long, surprising, and meaningful journey, a testament to how seemingly random encounters can change lives if we have the courage to look beyond first impressions. On the fateful Flight 1157, a middle-aged man shouted, pointing at the chest of an unsuspecting former Navy SEAL. "I told you to get your stuff off my seat, kid." The voice exploded like a firecracker, and the entire cabin fell silent. No one expected that just a few seconds later, an uncontrolled act would start a journey that would change the lives of not only them, but also countless others. A kick, a confrontation, and then an unlikely friendship. Will they stop at conflict, or be brave enough to step past prejudice and discover the truth behind the superficial layers? Join me as we follow this true story, a living testament that sometimes the best relationships start at the worst moments. If you love inspiring stories like this, don't forget to like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel to join us on our next journeys. And now, let's start with Flight 1157. From an accidental kick, from cold, prejudiced looks, a magical journey unfolded. A flight, a collision, an opportunity, for two people who never seemed to belong to the same world to find understanding, friendship, and together create great things for the community. The story of Marcus Washington and Richard Coleman is proof that change doesn't always start with perfection. Sometimes it starts with vulnerability, with misunderstanding. But if we have the courage to listen, to look deeper, good things will sprout, even in the places we least expect. And perhaps each of us is also on a flight somewhere between the invisible turns of life. What matters is not where we go, but how we connect, love, and change ourselves on that journey. If this story touched your heart, please let us know by click like to support the production team, share videos to spread good values, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next emotional journeys. See you in the next stories, where each trip is not just a journey through space, but also a journey through hearts.